And we're going to share this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we're live. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Comrade Capital's Chinese Marxism number 17.
Capital comrades.
Oh, God damn it.
It's so good.
Look, I thought it would be easier. The
1, 2, 3.
Okay.
It is. It's not you thought it'd be easier. It is easier. You just messed it up still.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is a redo. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Capital Comrades, Chinese Marxism number 17, where we're going to be reading 2 essays by Xi. The first one is Be Trustworthy Friends and Sincere Partners Forever from 2013, and the other one is Work Together for a Better Asia Pacific.
Yeah, and these essays actually touch, I think they're quite significant to the overall, I'm a little distracted because we're just sharing pages now, but they're quite significant to the overall schema of things because they deal with a little bit about Belt and Road and some of the trade stuff that's going on in Asia. And so it'll be quite significant to delve into those. Timothy, what did you think about these essays? Any thoughts?
Not at the outset. I read them a while ago, so I need a little bit of time to collect. But I had a couple of notes that I'll bring up when we get there. Did you have anything to say at the outset, Ernesto?
Yeah. So I looked a little bit into the trade relations beyond, what Xi expounds in his text, and I found something interesting that China financed Tanzania's biggest railway jet. It's
oh, really?
Yeah. The single track railway is 1,860 kilometers long. It is operated by the Tanzania Zambia Railway Authority, TAZARA. Yeah,
the scope, like the scale of some of the investments, like for Belt and Road and everything, it's just enormous.
And this one specifically was built with the intent of giving Zambia a road to the sea, right? Because Zambia is landlocked. And funnily, it seems that after apartheid ended in South Africa, Zambia could actually, travel through South Africa and so on, and they stopped needing these railways so much, right? But nevertheless, this created an infrastructure solution for the entirety of Tanzania, of the entire country, right?
Yeah.
But this also means that the Chinese nationals, because I also found this also very interesting, they're in a very privileged position to smuggle ivory.
Right? Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Upside for everything. There you go.
Yeah. Precisely. Yeah.
Well, I thought the thing about Tanzania, and that, I'm not like an expert in Tanzanian history as such, but I thought it was a good one to look at just in terms of how it relates to China's larger strategy in terms of Africa and so forth, or Chin Africa, as they. It's true. There's actually a newspaper called Chin Africa. That is true. It's Port Manu. And we know in 2013, of course, that Belt and Road gets going. And Belt and Road, I think, is an interesting thing because, of course, what Belt and Road means is really variable in terms of, the different members. Like, the kind of relationship that China has to Italy or Greece in Belt and Road is completely different than it would to certain African countries, for example, or Pakistan. Or but so really, it's a trade agreement. But in certain cases, right, it's been connected with the initiation of larger infrastructure projects, right? So I think I think Belt and Road is very often misunderstood in the West, and I think very often what we have is we have a narrative. Obviously these things are initiated like in China's self-interest. That goes without saying. But we often have a narrative in the West about like neo-imperialism and this kind of thing. And again, I'm not saying there's not like a kernel of truth in those sort of claims, but I think that one of the ways in which Belt and Road is fundamentally misunderstood is in the sense that maybe it's very different. Like if we talk about the Marshall Plan, this was enacted under conditions in which the U.S. Army was actually occupying Western Europe, so it's different. But I think the analogy would be relevant to the extent that Belt and Road, as I see it, and I think there's significant data that supports this conclusion. It's not about like a sort of like pilfering of resource. It's not about like trying to like suck these countries dry, as such, right? It's basically an effort to constitute a kind of a sort of block, a political block for China, right? And the thing is that China really wants to export its goods, right? And they want to have, they know that relations with the West are precarious in many respects. They've profited a great deal, right, from exporting goods to the West, but they also want to build their own sort of backdoor, right, for exports. And the thing is, like, if they were to, if you look at the way the West has behaved in Africa, for example, often there's been very, very little regard in terms of the genuine improvement of these economies, increasing the quality of life, purchasing power, and so on, right?
Yeah.
So I think the basic strategy of China is like they see an opportunity. Like the West has done very little, right? And often it's we look at Africa. It's like I think over 50% of manufacturing capital in Africa is controlled by Europe, for example. So horrible situations in terms of corporate rents, right? Terrible corruption, disease. Not a lot being done by the West, and we saw this recently with the vaccines, right? Very, very little being done that way. So I think China's basic thinking is like these places have been sort of sucked dry by the West and not doing very well. So in a way, because they've received so little assistance, I mean, like if you look at, again, I discussed the Marshall Plan. If you look at places like, Italy, for example, it was the recipient of a significant amount of U.S. aid. And that was kind of folded into the European context, right? The European community, the EU. So there, I wouldn't say that Italy is the country which is like the most jingoistically pro-American, but there's quite a bit of loyalty to that set of values and that bloc. And I think the feeling is like Africa is vulnerable enough in a sense, or they've been exploited enough by the West that they would be, a lot of these leaders would be amenable to working with China, right? To try to revitalize, the economies and infrastructure in that area, and also to turn these into valid, substantial trading partners, right? As well as people who are capable of buying Chinese goods, which again they are concerned with, and that's relevant with respect to the analogy of the Marshall Plan as well. So I think there's a certain misconception about it. I mean, I just don't see. I can't speak for every instance, and I know that it varies a little bit, but the whole narrative about sort of barefaced exploitation is challenged in certain ways. I mean, I know in the Chinese business community, a lot of people are freaking out, right? Because like, why are we spending so much money in these projects? Right? We ever going to get it back? Right? Because we're looking at like, didn't we see the statistics? What is the cost of this? Like, we're looking at like, it's like $1 trillion a year or something. It's like a 1 or 2 trillion a year. Yeah, that's being poured into servicing these projects. It's just enormous, right? Like this will, I said, over like a 10-year period, it's like the same expense. It's the same as like the entire US GDP in a year or something like that over like a 10-year period. And that's a lot, like, to put out, right? I mean, that's like all commercial activity in the United States and all government expense, right? And I think it also has to do with the balance of power in China between the political class and the business class as well, right? Because this is incumbent on, to some extent, taxation. Also, finance through publicly owned sectors of the economy, right? So I think it's also about pushing this kind of grandiose sort of political design, right? And being like, this is what we're doing, right? We're not just here to make our shareholders rich, right? We're also here to pursue this sort of lofty, international ally building and diplomacy, right?
Yeah, they're doing what the IMF says they want to do, but haven't done yet.
What are you talking about?
The IMF.
Mm-hmm. In what sense, though, would you say the IMF?
That's their whole point. They're supposed, to approach developing countries, give them loans so they can grow, create infrastructure, and then they, form a relationship of symbiosis. That's not what happens, of course, right? Mm-hmm. They just get shafted which is what China gets accused of doing also, right? And as you say, there is a grain of truth to it, but that is pretty much the policy in the West, right? In regards of developing countries, right? I'll give you an example in Mexico.
Yeah.
Right? We've recently had to kind of seize our ports back from a lot of private interests. They've been handed over to the military now, and a lot of the liberal media gets up in arms because they're militarizing the ports and so on. Turns out these companies turns out that China and Tanzania had a very similar disagreement, right? They had a lease on the ports for 99 years, right? Just 99 years of open lease, right? At a fixed rate. So talking of immense gains in the future, right? And again, it is the same kind of policy that China had in Tanzania. So I'm not saying that this is an exception or anything, right? But what I read is that in the case of Tanzania, they just renegotiated it back down to 33 years, right? And in the case of the West, usually when you try to do something about it, well, they just charge you a whole lot more, right? I think Argentina right now, they had to renegotiate a lot of their IMF debts because they didn't want to shake up the waters too much in case of taxation.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally this is certainly true with the West, though I should add that it depends on strategic position.
Yeah,
as well. So like if you look at the massive technology transfer and assistance that was given to East Asian countries, not China, but Taiwan and South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, that was motivated by desire to sort of outflank China in its development. And those countries have really prospered, right? Like there's real prosperity in those countries, which has a lot to do with domestic ownership. Like Japan, they have their own companies; they're not paying rents. They collect rents. Right?
Could it be more of a cultural affront here?
How should you say?
Would it be more of a cultural kind of affront here also? Right? They're trying to out-culture the Chinese.
Yeah, well, I think just I think build these places into strong economies. Which
I'm saying because there's a very similar kind of the dynamic in Latin America, right? There are some countries that have this strategic cultural value, and they get a lot of cultural investment, like Chile or Argentina.
Yeah, I was thinking about Chile.
And you have countries like Brazil, right, which are just completely neglected. They are just left alone, right? I mean, wherever they speak Portuguese, they don't even speak Spanish. So why even try to create a culture with them, right? And instead, they just exploit it, right? Like pretty much Africa, also for the West.
Yeah, well, it's always about the So this is what I mean. That's the general situation. But in these regions, the West always has to have its sort of representatives, right? And we see this with Israel, with what's going on right now, right? And to some extent, though it's a complex relationship, Saudi Arabia as well, right?
Both are the West's encroachment on the Middle East.
So it's like this is what I mean. It's like, and I think that as regards, Chile is a very prosperous place, right? Israel is a very prosperous place. Taiwan is a very prosperous place. Japan is a very prosperous place. Those are real, those are places that have, and a lot of the citizens have really benefited, right, from the support that
at times. I mean, right now, Chile is one of the countries that has, massive riots, right?
Well, yeah, and look at Pinochet. It's like, okay, but I mean in general, right?
Yeah, of course. It's extreme ups and downs.
Yeah, people have benefited from that enrichment, and all I mean is like that. I think when we talk about, because the thing is like, conservatives will do this, right? They'll say, but what about this or that? And just to understand, we're talking about a general phenomenon, right? In terms of it's not like every country is going to be worse, right? Because of the political and economic presence of the United States or the West in general, right? But most of them will. Because there's an agenda. There's an agenda there, isn't there? Right?
Yeah. So I mean, you have Chile, and then you have Colombia, right? And they both speak Spanish. Why not develop the whole region?
So I think what if you look at what what's going on in terms of China. I mean, I think in a way it's based on a certain kind of political foresight, of the political class, because I think the feeling is like, well, we could just enrich ourselves here and like continue to try to develop, and that's, you know, it's a lot of people, that's a lot, but at the same time, it's like, you know, will that, if the West succeeds in you know, if we don't build ties with these other places, and if the West is trying to turn a lot of countries against us and we haven't built those relations, will that eventually kind of boomerang and fuck up our domestic growth even, right? Like, will that be sustainable, you know, in light of like the sort of geopolitical pressure that can be instigated and applied? So it's very interesting, but I think, you know, in a way, you look at what China is doing now, it's a huge push. And, you know, I think strategically, you know, the West has made certain errors in terms of how, really since the end of the Cold War, in terms of not instigating these very sort of bold campaigns to bring regions kind of into their camp, so to speak. So it's like when the Soviet Union fell, where was like the Marshall Plan? You know, why didn't they invest and try to, you know, because we know Russia, of course, taken over sort of by oligarchs, right? You know, really, really terrible collapse in the standard of living, you know, infant mortality, all of this in the 90s. Where were they then? Right? And they didn't do anything. And you see what happens now with Putin, and it's inevitable. Look at Turkey and the European situation. You know, 60% of Turks saying we want to work in the European Union. Europe, you know, but Europeans saying no, right? Look at Donald Trump recently with the Iran deal, and then China going to Iran, right? You know, like Iran has you know had historically strong relations with the West, right? And you see this even like in a way. Like after 9/11, you know, people in Saudi Arabia were like celebrating, and in Iran they were like holding vigils and stuff. You know, sort of a different thing, right? So Iran is not necessarily. I don't think it's a country that would be like a priori averse to Western, you know, cooperation. But you know, they blow that opportunity, and then China swoops in. So I think you see that China is really on the take, and that they're much more active at this point. You know, perhaps out of necessity in terms of trying to build their bloc, right? Right. So there you go. By the way, do you guys have any comments on that? So we get into the readings now, but do you guys have any thoughts on that? Any comments?
No, let's get into the readings then.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, so the first one, what's the title of the first one again? Just give it to me. Give it back to me.
Be trustworthy friends and sincere partners forever.
Oh yeah, I love that title so much. It's so great. Okay. So, any thoughts on this one?
Well,
how long is this? Is this too long for us to read? How long is it? Yeah, it's a bit long.
Yeah, I don't think we can go through it all.
Okay, that's fine.
Do we have thoughts on it then?
It's pretty long. Well, I already shared some of the stuff I found about Chinese-Tanzanian relationships.
What's interesting here, he touches on the exchanges between China and Africa. So he says in the 1950s and 60s, the first generation leaders of the PRC, Mao Zedong, Lao Enlai, and others, and African statesmen of the older generation ushered China-Africa relations into a new era. Since then, the Chinese and African peoples have supported and cooperated with each other in our respective endeavors to fight against colonialism and imperialism and win independence and liberation in the pursuit of development and national renewal. A fraternal bond of shared destiny has been forged between us. What's interesting is sort of how nondescript this is as well. And actually, like, there's a reason for that, which is because in China, like, you can read this in Julia Lavelle's book on global Maoism, but like China really strongly supported, you know, they gave a lot of support so far as they could to like anti-apartheid movements and things like this in Africa. And they had like revolutionary training centers and everything. And a lot of these places were like really crazy. You know, they were set up like covertly. You know, people would come and try to get all the food for free and stuff from there. but the thing is, like, since the Deng era, China has like in that Mao period, like the level of international engagement was really intense. right? You had a situation like in the Great Leap Forward, you had like people starving in China in the millions probably, and they were like shipping rice to Albania and stuff. Like it's such a high priority. So you know you have all kinds of things in Africa, things in Latin America, and we see the legacy of this, right? In Asia, we see the legacy of this, right? Because you look in India, right? You have you know, the Naxalites, right? Maoist guerrillas there. You look in the Philippines, right? All over, right? You have these groups, in many cases, which are not directly supported by China now, right? Like you had Philippines, they're working with Duterte, who's killing the Maoists, right? Ironic. You know, realpolitik taking precedence above all else, right? But the point is, he says like we've had very strong relations, right? But he doesn't really go into much detail, and part of that is because there's a real embarrassment in China about the level of tampering in other countries' affairs that happened in that time, which is, you know, it's really, really not dwelt upon, right? You know, and it's like it's erased from history, like to the point where like, you know, you get them saying things like, "Oh, China's been around for so and so on. China's never intervened in other countries' affairs." You know, and it's like, well, I'm pretty sure, like, just like a few years ago, you know, not long ago, a few decades ago, you're pretty fucking involved, right? Now, I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying it's bad. I think a lot of it was good. But the point is that it's something they kind of turn the page on, right? So you see this quite like boilerplate kind of thing. Like he's not really getting into that. But he does kind of vaguely allude to it. He's like, yes, we fight against imperialism together. But you know, the word socialism or communism is mostly omitted, and it's not very descriptive on the whole, right? Let's see here. Yeah, it's quite interesting. In the past 5 decades, 18,000 Chinese medical personnel have worked in Africa, providing medical care and treatment to 250 million local patients. So again, like that should probably clue you off as to what I'm saying with the size of the engagement. But it's not described in political terms. Like when he's talking about, he says like, "Oh, it was medical personnel." You know, he's not like, "Oh, we had actually sent like revolutionary cadre like out there trying to like agitate." No, big connections too, and in Zimbabwe too with Mugabe and stuff like that, right? You had big, very controversial leader, of course. But you know, I mean, like it's always a hard thing to solve, right? These situations. It's like what Zizek always says, right? Like how do we be more extreme than Mandela without becoming Mugabe? You know, it's a tough thing. So he talks a little bit here about earthquake assistance, stuff like that. And again, I think it's interesting, like the way he talks about it in that they've been nurtured step by step. Like it's so vague. It's like, okay. When we drink water from the well, we should not forget those who dug it. Okay.
Yeah.
Their shared history. And he notes here the speed of the development in Africa. It's become one of the fastest growing regions in the world, and is forging ahead like a galloping African lion. It says.
Yeah. In fact, Dar es Salaam is one of the fastest growing cities in the world.
Yeah, well, like wherever in Africa, like so, a lot of countries, I think you have situations where you don't have, you know, basic infrastructure needs being met and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But wherever they get some semblance of infrastructural setup, then you see really, really high growth rates, and it's normal because a lot of these places are so poor, right? And we know that, you know, when you're starting from like a really, really, you know, meager position like that, it's very easy to rack up.
In fact, one of the benefits of the Tazara Railway was that they created a commuter line also. So now they could develop a whole series of suburbs around Dar es Salaam and stimulate the economy, you know, through population growth, which here in America we hate to do, right? This whole commuter railways and so on.
Yeah, well, and you know, one of the big things that's emerged with these projects, right, is like the that a lot of them have not been like totally serviced since they were established, right? Which is another reason why, like, I told you there are segments of like the economic community in China that have attacked quite relentlessly, been attacking like Belt and Road as like a wasted expense. But often China will build these things, but they don't have personnel to maintain them. So sometimes they can fall into a state of disarray, right, depending on the infrastructure maintenance programs that they have set up in those countries. So he's talking here about the 20 billion credit line that was given to Africa from 2013 to 2015. China will actively implement the African Talent Program, train 30,000 African professionals in various areas, provide 18,000 government scholarships to Africa between 2013 and 2015, and increase technology transfer and experience sharing with Africa. And that's very interesting as well, because, and I know this, because I have a personal contact. But when you go, if they're talking about training professionals. If you look at Chinese schools, right, like major Chinese schools, they actually set aside a lot of spots, right, for like their international exchange programs. Like if you look at often like European universities, they'll have like I don't know, and they're probably smaller too, but they'll have like like to a university they're exchanging with, right? Like Erasmus kind of thing, for example. They'll set up like 6 or 8 spots for a particular school for people from another school. In China, they'll set up like 52. Like for so basically they're saying like the message is like send as many people as you want, right, as many as you possibly could, right? So you see there's this, and I think this has been particularly significant because I do think a lot of African students now are coming to study in China, right, and acquiring knowledge of the Chinese language and that kind of thing. So hopefully that yields positive results. Just 1 second here.
Very likely.
Yeah, I think that's probably good. So he's going through here. Here he goes through the different points, which maybe we could go through because he has a list here, right, and what they're going to do, right?
Yeah.
So wait, here we go. We have. So I'm trying to find the first one exactly. I see the second.
First, we will continue to treat our African friends with sincerity. Right?
Yeah. Do you want to read just a little off that? Yeah.
Sure thing. Yeah. First, we will continue to treat our African friends with sincerity. Nothing is more valuable than true friends. The China-Africa traditional friendship is what we cherish dearly. Unity and cooperation with African countries have always been an important foundation of China's foreign policy.
This is pretty much what he says. So we probably don't have to go on much, but okay.
Yeah.
So we go second. So I'm not going to read like the whole thing of these.
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Second, we seek to deliver real outcomes and conduct in cooperation with Africa. China both champions and applies mutually beneficial cooperation with Africa. China views its own development as closely connected with that of Africa, and the interests of the Chinese people is closely connected with those of the African people. Okay, let's move over to 3.
I can do the third.
And this, by the way, that point there is when he talks about the scholarships and all that stuff. Third, you want to go over Timothy?
Yeah, it says, third, we will continue to build a close bond of friendship with Africa. The Chinese and African people share a natural feeling of affinity towards each other. We Chinese believe that the pleasure of life lies in having blossom friends. And friends. Having blossom friends. Is it
blossom friends?
Yeah. Okay. Then how can China and Africa become blossom friends?
Okay, I think that's pretty much all.
Awesome. Sorry.
Blossom friends. That's pretty much all they say there.
It's the same thing. Blossom. What is bosom?
No.
Bosom friends.
What he answers his own question. What does he say to his own question? He says,
in-depth dialogue and concrete action.
Yeah. Okay. That's what he wants to say. Yeah,
that's what he says. Yeah. But he talks about how some African performers have become popular stars in China. Great Life of a Wife, a Chinese TV series about how life unfolds in ordinary Chinese families, has become quite a hit in Tanzania. I love this stuff. This is stuff in the West you wouldn't know about,
Fourth, we will resolve problems that may occur in our cooperation with good faith. That's what he says, resolve things in good faith. I mean, it's just saying the same thing again for 3-4 sentences.
It's very generic. It's very
repetitive. I did have a highlight towards the end of the essay if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
I just want to before you do that, there's a paragraph here I want to look at. At present, China remains a populous country with a weak economic foundation and uneven development. Our aggregate GDP is quite large. However, when divided by 1.3 billion, China's per capita GDP is only around the 90th place in the world. Some 128 million Chinese are still living below the poverty line set by the United Nations. And by the way, that was the big thing. They had the big, celebration regarding that they had wiped out poverty in China. The only thing about that is that, of course, like, there's domestic poverty and there's international poverty. So they went off the international, like they wiped it out based on the international standard.
Which is like $2 a day or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like, actually we were talking about Li Keqiang, right? He appoints the state ministries. What is it? We were talking about this last time, Ernesto, the feud between, 1 second. Li Keqiang, here we go. Premier of the State Council of the People's Republic of China. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so after I told you he trolled Xi a bit. Mm-hmm. So while they were doing this whole poverty thing, he was just like, look, he was like, we still have, and I forget the exact number he cited, but he's like, we still have this enormous number of people who are living on less than US $200 a month. So let's not like, and it's a little weird, that whole poverty thing, because now like they're starting to do things like erase references to poverty in official documents and stuff like that. So while they have definitely made some strides, I think realistically there's still a long way to go, and mm-hmm. that has to be strengthened and continued, right, for sure. But yeah, of course he often stresses here in a way that evokes Deng a little bit, just the weakness of the overall economy. And I think what he's getting at here is like, he's like, we're not really, that much more together. It's not like we're that much richer than Africa, like they are, but like, I mean, I don't know. There are African countries, I'm sure, that have like a higher GDP per capita than China. Overall, as like a national and infrastructural project, yeah, China's more together. Mm-hmm. But I think his point is like in pure wealth terms, we're still relatively poor. It's just by virtue of size, right? That we're able to have this sort of authority. So there's a point you wanted to bring up, Timothy.
Yeah, it's actually the next paragraph. I think summarizes well. China cannot develop in isolation from the rest of the world or Africa. On their part, both the rest of the world and Africa also need China to seek prosperity and stability. Though there is a broad ocean between us, China and Africa share a strong empathy. We are bound not only by profound traditional friendship and closely linked interests, but also by the dreams we each have. Which I feel like that encapsulates a lot of the repetitions in this essay.
Yeah. And I mean, it's but it's actually interesting. I do recommend, if people are curious about this subject, I think one thing that's good to look at is Yanis Varoufakis when he talks about. Yeah. Have you seen that video? Yeah.
Should we watch it here or something? Do you want to play it?
Yeah, let's put it on. Yeah, let's put it on. Yeah, the Varoufakis one is good. Do you want to put that on, Ernesto?
Yes, let me.
Okay. It's a good video. You haven't seen that, Timothy?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you should take a look. It's a great video. I think, again, in terms of, to me, Varoufakis is one of the best, in terms of overall perspective, economics, global thinking.
Let's hope this works. Okay.
Okay, I'll just get your thing up here. Okay, there you go. You want to pop us in full screen? Okay.
As close as I can. I don't know if I can actually. Do you see it in full screen?
Yeah, that's good. That's great.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's full screen for you.
Well, it's as much as it's going to be.
It's big for.
I can't hear anything though.
Mm-hmm.
It's super low.
Streaming your audio.
There.
No. Did you click the share audio button when you shared it? You might have to share. Make sure you click share audio.
Okay, let me do that again.
Yeah.
Share screen. Select window. Yanis Varoufakis. Allow, and I don't see any other buttons for sharing audio.
And you play? Do you have audio on that? Okay, let me try. Okay.
Go for it. Yeah,
I'm gonna do that. Give me a sec.
I'll share the link.
Yeah, you got the link? Okay, just pop it in for me. Okay.
Yep, there it is.
You put it through Facebook? Okay.
Private chat.
In
StreamYard.
Oh, yeah. Okay, wait.
Been very concerned lately about China and.
Okay.
This is a shorter one.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just pop this in. Okay. Share audio. There we go. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Oh wait, I gotta put it in. There you go. You got. Oops.
I can see. Okay, I can see.
There you go. Okay, here you can see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, it's full screen.
Very concerned lately about
I can hear it.
China and sort of we have transferred so much money from our economy over to China by buying all those things and supporting their economy over there so they could make more and more money. They are now all over Africa, buying things and investing over there and getting those countries dependent on them and supporting, non-democratic people. And I'm just
like
wondering-
whom?
Well,
We are in a country that supports Saudi Arabia.
yes, that's
Yeah.
true. Right. So
Suddenly we have a problem with, superpowers supporting non-democratic people.
yes, yes, I do. But I also am just concerned that we've sort of created the economic power that China sort of has now, and they're using it, I fear, going to be using it against us eventually and against the better interests of a lot of people.
Allow me to put your mind to rest.
Okay, great.
You shouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
Very simple. And let me explain why you shouldn't worry about that. But please continue.
Well, they're, they're in Africa. They're lending money to countries to build ports and different
to
infrastructure.
build what?
Port.
And what's wrong with that?
And because
Countries that need ports get ports.
but they're making people dependent on. I know it's the same thing that we've done, which is
No, it's not.
horrible around the world.
They are far more humanistic than the United States ever was.
Really? Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So
Let me give you an example. Of course, they are peddling for influence.
yeah.
Yeah, but they are non-interventionist, absolutely non-interventionist in a way that Europeans, the West, has never managed to fathom.
But I have a feeling they have a longer term thought process that is more interventionist.
But
anyway,
let's judge what we see. Let's judge what.
Okay.
Well, let's start at the beginning. The Chinese never asked Apple to go to Shenzhen and produce all the iPhones. It was Steve Jobs that decided that. Yeah?
Mhm.
It was not China that went to Washington, D.C. and demanded that they buy a third of your national debt. If they hadn't bought it, you would be in serious trouble. Okay. Number three, I did allude to this in my talk. If in 2008 China had not cranked up their credit bubble, you would be in a new Great Depression now. So, China, the United States, and the European Union are absolutely synergistic, and they need one another in a way that if we fail to acknowledge and to nurture, billions of people, including the majority of the people in this country, are going to suffer. Now, I am not going to stand here and defend China and the Chinese Communist Party. I already made some negative remarks about the Chinese Communist Party in referring to, their attitudes as being compatible with those of Wolfgang Schäuble. My concern about China is the authoritarian manner in which the Chinese regime is treating the Chinese people. As a Democrat, I have a problem with this. Mind you, I have to tell you that, from my understanding of China, it's a very interesting social experiment, in the sense that at the local level, or the regional level, you now have a boisterous democracy. At the local and regional level, with popular success stories in overthrowing local authorities, local bureaucrats who have been corrupt, who have been this, who have been that, who have been the other. When it comes to the influence of China outside its borders, I have to say, firstly, it's quite remarkable that they don't seem to have any military ambitions. Secondly, Africa. I'll give you an example, a specific example. Ethiopia. 2004, because I happened to be there, and I have some first-hand experience of it. They went into Ethiopia. I'll tell you why they went into Ethiopia, because they suspected there was oil. Because China is a major industrial power, but it lacks primary resources. Now, instead of going into Africa with troops, colonially, destroying the country, killing people like the West has done for the last 100 years, what they did was they went to Addis Ababa and they said to the government, we would like, we can see you have problems with your infrastructure. We would like to build some new airports, upgrade your railway system, create a telephone system, and rebuild your roads. And we'll do this all for free. No strings attached. We don't want anything from you. And they did. Why did they do it? Because this is soft power. Because because they knew that if oil is discovered, and it was discovered later, then, of course, the Ethiopian government will be much more open to Chinese oil companies coming there. They have never combined their investment with imperialistic. When I was Minister of Finance, I had a very interesting experience with COSCO, one of the Chinese national companies that, in the end, bought the port of Piraeus. When I moved into the ministry, I found a contract from the previous government that they had already sold the port of Piraeus for a pittance and other ridiculous conditions to the Chinese, under the guidance, of course, of the European Union and the International Monetary Fund as well. And in other words, as a minister, I was bound to a particular deal that was terrible for Greece. And I went to the Chinese and discussed it with them. And I was really astonished. I said to them, look, you're paying too little. You're not committing to a sufficient level of investment. And you are treating our workers as fodder. You are effectively subcontracting labor to horrible companies that exploit the workers. And I can't deal with this. And effectively, I proposed to them to renegotiate the contract. So instead of getting 67% of the shares of the port, they would get, with the same price, 51%. The remaining shares would go into the Greek pension fund system in order to bolster the capitalization of the public pensions. Secondly, I want you to commit to 180 million euros of investment within 12 months. And thirdly, proper collective bargaining with the trade unions and no subcontracting of labor. And to my astonishment, they said, okay. Can you imagine if that was a German company or an American company? That's why I'm saying I don't think you should worry.
Okay, I won't.
Oops, there we go. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So what did you think, Timothy? You've never seen that?
I didn't realize how funny that was.
Timothy,
funny.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I think okay, it's me, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, can you hear me, Ernesto?
Sorry?
I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, it's Conrad.
Yeah. What did you think, Timothy? You've never seen it?
No, I hadn't seen it before. That was funny, but it's interesting. It helped. I mean, it gives more context to what we've been reading. But that's the. I don't know. I still don't know what to make of what China is. I mean, like, I don't think it's fully developed what they're doing. Right now. I'm curious where it's going to go. Is basically what I'm saying. It reminds me more. One thought I've been having is it reminds me a little bit more of China's like historical position with like the mandate of heaven and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. More. It rhymes more with that than like the West's colonial expansion. Like it has more of this like. Yeah. Reciprocality to it, I've been noticing.
Yeah, and it goes along with what we were discussing, right, about the railway and so on. Mm-hmm. It turns out that China will usually just use these investments to, as Varoufakis was saying, sure, there's oil discovered, right? Okay, so here in Mexico, in Sonora, we discovered lithium. right? And Bolivia had this whole thing when they discovered lithium. Something very interesting happened, right? So when we discovered lithium, what's been going on is that we've had some ties with some infamous Canadian mining corporations, and also with
we
China.
got some bad ones.
Yeah. We're very familiar with them. Yeah. So we had some dealings with Canadian corporations and with Chinese corporations. And a lot of what's happening in Tanzania with the Tazaran Railway goes along those same lines. Chinese nationals invest in the country, right? They buy shares in local companies, and they develop economic, levers, right? Like I think that's very true. But they do it in a way that respects the sovereignty of the people that they're working with. Sure, they contract, right, things away from them, money mostly, but not their democratic rights.
Well, I think the
is he getting choppy?
As regards, I think
Conrad. Yeah,
sorry, my connection.
You're back.
Yeah, sorry. I think with this, I think that ultimately the fact of the matter is that, we can appeal to cultural explanations. The opinion of it is, I think that China's, I'm just going to close. I had torrent running, and I'm just going to close.
Okay.
My opinion of it, back. Okay. You got me. Okay. My opinion of it, on the whole, is that I think that the thing is, it's a question of the economic structure, right? And I think that if you look at China today, I've said this before, it's not an economy where the goal is unambiguously to valorize private capital, right? In many ways, you could argue that the private capital is instrumentalized in China in order to enlarge state holdings, right? That would be a more accurate way of defining their economy. So I think that, when you're in this, I think if you look at the particular context that leads to something like imperialism, right, which is of course like a sort of colonialism on steroids, right, would be one way of describing it. I think it's connected. We have a sort of classic analysis of this, right? We have, the formation of public monopolies, right? Basically like the tendential rate of profit falling, right? And then the formation of monopolies, right? And then the effort to expand markets, right? To sort of forcibly extract wealth or resources from other countries in order to offset this, right? Well, look, if we're looking at China, we have two major issues we have to remember. One, their domestic market, hasn't been capitalized to that degree, right? There's still a lot of room for growth there, right? And two, we're not necessarily dealing with private capital, right? Public capital has a different mandate in terms of how it functions. So I think that these things mitigate against the adoption of something like a purely imperialistic agenda in China. I just bring this up because I think that, I don't think we can just relate it to history. Culture and history has some effect. I really see it as a question of economic direction. And I think that if China goes in like a really capitalist direction and, develops its internal market, I think you're going to see the same phenomenon. I think you will see imperialism becoming the norm, right? I think if it goes in another direction, the direction could be different. As regards the current situation, I'm not saying that this is all benevolent. I do think, though, the consequence of this interplay of forces is that it turns out being more reciprocal than a lot of what you find in the West, right, in terms of how that functions. So I think, again, this is when you talk about long-term plans, Belt and Road could mean a lot of things, right? We don't know what it's going to mean, right? I think that, I think naturally in the West, it's like with social credit, you can see a similar thing. Like there's a tendency to read the most dystopic, to take the most dystopic angle, to take it at what is absolute worst. So again, like if you look at social credit, people weren't talking about what it actually is. They're talking about what under the worst conditions it could be. No, I'm not saying that's a good idea, right? But it is one that's supported by the Chinese people and that is not symmetrical with the way it's represented in the Western media, right? So they're kind of going to the worst possible thing. I'm not saying it's impossible to turn out that way, right? But it's never like a take what we see kind of thing, is it? Which is what Varoufakis is saying. Let's look at what we see, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the West also has its credit score systems. It's not social credit system, right? But it does assign people a profile, and it depends a lot on their income, right? And on their past, on the way that they've handled their previous debts, on the debts they've incurred, on what property they own, right? Like, this is all something that goes on in the West. It's just very, very well ruled by capital exclusively, right? There is no human element to it.
I agree, Ernesto.
Thank you, Timothy. Yeah, I think Conrad cut out completely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he just froze for me for a while, and
he's moving for me.
Yeah, he's back, I think.
Oh, he's gone again.
Yes.
Hmm.
He can't be trying, I think, though.
Maybe. I don't know. Who knows what he's doing? I'm trying to find the... I don't know. I found the...
Yes?
I'm more... Yeah, so I don't know if when Conrad's going to come back. Is there anything else that you wanted to say on the subject, or do you want to kind of move over to the second essay?
Well, I just looked a little bit into the whole situation with Tanzania. I found that they canceled a 10 billion loan from China at some point in the middle of the pandemic. Apparently, the president, the prime minister, yeah. But apparently, they took a 35 billion loan last May. So, I guess they just renegotiated it or something.
Okay.
And it looks like 100 Chinese companies have expressed. This is from Tarifa.rw. That's Rwanda, right?
Yeah, I think that's Rwanda.
Yeah, a news corporation just saying that 800 companies were looking into investing in Tanzania, right? So yeah, it looks like these relations that they were talking about 7-8 years ago are still going on strong. So yeah, I guess we can move on.
Yeah, I found. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to pull out in particular on the... I can't give Conrad's... Do you want to give an overview of it? Or Conrad's usually the one who does it with the historical notes.
Yeah, because he usually has them ready,
Yeah. No. Yeah. Probably, yeah, these are very... There's a lot of repetitions, and it's easy to kind of lose the details in that. But,
okay, so then...
That happened in Bali.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting that that the conversation happened in Bali. I don't know. It's just not an area I think of a lot. Do you know what the reason for? Did he say what the reason for that was, or is it just?
Well, it's the APEC CEO Summit.
So,
is this a state-sponsored or no? Well, I mean, this is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. So initiated in 1996, the APEC CEO Summit provides an opportunity for business leaders in the Asia Pacific to engage in discussions with APEC economic leaders, policymakers, academia, and other CEOs on issues facing the region. The summit is held in the APEC host economy just prior to the annual APEC leaders meeting, and is an example of APEC's efforts to promote public-private sector dialogue and cooperation. Okay. The last summit was convened in Vladivostok, Russia, right? And oh my God!
What'd you find?
One of the speakers was our ex-president Felipe Calderón. That's terrible.
Was he the neoliberal guy you've talked about a bit before?
No, he was the war on drugs guy.
Oh, that guy. Okay.
Yeah. The genocidal president, what we call it.
Genocidal. Okay.
Hey,
sorry, guys. I had to reboot my box because sometimes
that's perfect. We've held.
Your camera's a lot clearer. Yeah, we're on the second essay now, just talking about what APEC is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wait, let's get to that. Okay, what's the title of the second essay again?
It's building like a stronger, working together for a better Asia Pacific.
Okay.
It's page 380 in the PDF.
Sure. By the way, here they noted that the first speech we read was delivered at the Forum for China Africa Cooperation, which was founded in 2000 in Beijing. Working for a better
Asia Pacific.
Currently, by the way, on the APEC, just looking at the map, it's kind of interesting. A lot of what country is that? I can't.
the Asia Pacific Business Community here. Okay.
Yeah, like Central America really doesn't seem to be involved. Also,
Indeed.
yeah, like it's just there's like a weird hole right there. Like Chile, what is that? Peru, but like Venice, not Venice. Colombia isn't involved.
Guatemala, Belize, yeah, they're all neglected.
So which part are we here? We're just on the first page?
Yeah, we were just talking about why it was taking place in Bali.
Oh, okay. So let's hear. Do people have observations on this one? Yeah.
There's one quote at the beginning, if we want to start there, that I had where I said, okay, so the Asia Pacific region has long been an important engine. I'll just read the whole paragraph. Where can we find that? Or confronted with these new challenges, both developed and developing economies are looking for new drivers of growth. Where can we find them? In my opinion, they can only be found through reform, readjustment, and innovation. The Asia Pacific region has long been an important engine of world economic growth. To push for recovery in the sluggish world economy, economies in the Asia Pacific region should have the courage to do what has never been done before and build an open growth mode featuring innovative development, interactive growth, and converging interests. Only by doing so can Asia Pacific economies play a leading role in the recovery of the world economy. As a Chinese poem runs, when one doubts whether there is a way out from the endless mountains and rivers, one suddenly finds a village shaded by a soft willow and bright flowers.
Yeah, what's interesting too is he relates the need for Asia Pacific partnership to some of the failures in Doha at the WTO, right? Which is really interesting, right? Because you see China's kind of like turn. Because what year was it that China joined the WTO? 1 second. I think it was like just before Xi came into power, right?
Was that like 2011 or something?
Oh, 2001 actually. So it was actually
a lot
12 years before. Yeah, I got that wrong. But yeah, sort of in the era of when I think China was kind of at its peak in terms of pursuing a more capitalistic agenda, right? I think this was was it Jintao? I think was like a little later. I think this would have been Jiang Zemin, right? Who I think was probably the most sort of capitalist leaning leader in China's history. So we could. I mean, it depends how you judge it, obviously. But I mean, like he came kind of in that period where there was like supreme confidence in sort of the Dengist agenda, right? But it was very controversial, actually, China joining the WTO, because of course that forces you to be in conformance with all kinds of trade regulations, right? So but here, right, he's saying, well, we've had trouble in the WTO, right, and that's sort of the frame, right, that he's using to bring to this. So it certainly raises some interesting questions. He talks here about whether they can meet their growth targets, right? Because of course there's a lot of skepticism about China's ability to maintain high growth, right? Given how much they've already expanded. But he says, in my opinion, we can make, this is reasonable, right? Let's see here, wait. It's fine. He says here that the fundamentals of the Chinese economy are good. GDP growth and other major economic indicators are within the expected range. So everything that's been going as expected, and nothing has come as a surprise. The slowdown of the Chinese economy is an intended result of our own regulatory initiatives. This is because, according to a thorough calculation done at the time, we set our mid and long-term development goals to double the 2010 GDP and per capita income by 2020. It is judged that a 7% annual growth rate would suffice. Moreover, we have to recognize that to ensure long-term economic development, China has to press ahead with structural reform, even if this requires some sacrifice of pace. In whatever undertaking, one has to look far and plan wisely to take care of both short and long-term needs. Killing the goose to get the eggs or draining the pond to catch the fish is no formula for sustainable development. So you see this is what he was saying about China in the age of reflexive development, right? And it's not that the development has desisted, but it's that there's an off-shifting of priorities, right? Which you can see here. in terms of, yeah, we got to keep this development, but we should address these other issues, right? We already talked about a lot of these, right, early on, right? Corruption, the environment, the construction of domestic markets, international power blocks, and so on, right? Actually, yeah, and corrupt with corruption being the one that sort of, is the framing of his leadership initially, right? As he says, he has all these quotes about that, right? Like he says, like a worm can't penetrate like the wood if the wood isn't rotten, and this is other one, like a few worms can break a wall or something like that. Like, so there's this sort of like, he always goes back to the reference, right, of the worms embedded in them. So let's see here. China is moving from over-reliance on investment and export in the past to increased dependence on domestic demand, especially on consumption. I stress that as being very, very significant, right, in terms of, the kind of goal, and particularly to shift their economy. When you're talking about Africa, particularly to make it like they want to build domestic demand, but they also want to build demand in parts of the world that are firmly within their. That's what I was trying to say, within their, that are aligned with them geopolitically.
Yeah,
because they've been in a position for a long time where if the United States says like no more, then they're fucked.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and the real point here is that the United States has failed to do so. They've had the opportunity, right? And also Europe has had the opportunity, as you were saying, in terms of Eastern Europe, right?
Yeah,
we're talking about the Marshall Plan and so on, and they just neglected it entirely.
Yeah, it's a strategic failure. But yeah, it's like, the thing is, like, we have to ask ourselves why, the United States didn't say, and a lot of it's like buying goodwill, right? I mean, like, when China came in after the crisis in 2008 and went and like bought, a lot of the US debt, right? It's like, part of it was like trying to cultivate forms of interdependency, right? To prevent the US from pulling the rug out from under them, right? As it turns out, the US was very, there were, especially after Tiananmen, there was a lot of pressure, right? But the US almost, the thing about the thing is that, and I've said this before, like, China, in a way, they like saved capitalism, right? And I know, like, for our, hardcore CCCP, communist faction, they might not like that, but it is true, right? Yeah. Because if you look at, if you look at a lot of people who've put work into like trying to analyze profit rates and stuff like that and kind of apply a Marxian analysis, one thing that, they point out is that, I mean, if you look at the whole agenda, that like it's this sort of, I'm going to try to explain this a little bit. It's a bit of a paradox, right? So on one hand, if you look at the way that automation, for example, which is related to the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, has the effect of causing underconsumption and so on, right? One of the paradoxes of this is it necessitates greater and greater, under normal conditions, it would necessitate greater and greater public intervention in the government, in the economy. Right, and that's kind of what you have in the post-war era, right?
Yeah.
You have extensive investment that's targeted at dealing with these issues, but eventually that reaches a point, right, where socialization becomes so extensive that it actually threatens the capacity or the sort of hegemony of private capital, right? And this is part of why you have these a lot of these post-war struggles. I think in England, for example, in the late 70s, the battle between the miners, right, and the corporate class and some of the political class, and that sort of is related to Thatcher's descendants, right, is very connected with this, right? This desire to sort of like retake, to reestablish sort of the dignity of private companies, right, and their right to freely hire and fire and make money and not be overtaxed and make money as they need to.
Yeah.
And I think what you see is that the problem with this, though, right, is that in this context where you have, for example, like automotive productivity continuing to rise, right, is that this doesn't address this issue of underconsumption, right? That might spike, that might have like the short-term effect of spiking up, the profitability of different corporations, but you still have these longer-term structural issues, right? So how are they dealing with it in the United States? They were dealing with it through, extensive debt, right? Rather than socialization, rather than burdening the companies, extensive debt. And we see this with like the whole credit explosion. It's just around that time, like around 1980, the credit cards get really, really The mortgage bubble, of course, that culminates later in 07, 08. But another really, really important strategy that was used for dealing with it was cheap goods, right? Because, Marx has this concept, of course, right? The cost of the means of subsistence, right? Going back to Ricardian analysis, right? The significance of this to the generation of capital, right? So what was happening is that China was being used to lower the cost of the means of subsistence, which means that there's less redistribution necessary, right? So again, in this situation where, had the U.S. not had recourse to these different options, right? That cycle that kind of blew up in a way, but they still hobble along, right? Would never have been possible, right? That's sort of opening up, right? But there would have been a much deeper structural crisis earlier. So again, in order to foster their own development, the effective consequence of what China did was it kind of gave another wind, right, to capitalism. Does that make sense, guys? Do you understand? Yeah. Okay. So that's just that's an important thing to know. Let's see here. He says here we shouldn't look to GDP growth as the sole aspect of success. But what I was
something pretty controversial, by the way, here in Latin America. Yeah, our president has been starting to say the same thing, and they've been calling him, like a dreamer, an idealist, right? And he's saying, no, we should look at the Human Development Index, rates and so on. And people are like, no, GDP. Yeah.
I mean, I think you do have to look at I think you have to look at GDP and Gini as well. Obviously, I'm a bit skeptical about there are quality of life metrics which are very tangible and usable. I'm a bit skeptical sometimes with people's proposal that we like restructure economics to create a whole separate, because the problem is it's like trying to graft like a qualitative analysis into a system that's fundamentally based on quantitative exchange. Like, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like wanting your communist accounting within your capitalist economy. It doesn't really, this is a quantitative system. That's how it works. It's very hard to, like that logic is sort of the dominant logic of our society. Right. And I think that you can supplement it, you can add things, but I think it's very hard to redefine how you approach that, which he isn't proposing anyways. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. He's just saying that we shouldn't focus on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's true, because you could, and he makes the case, right? You could have companies that concentrate the GDP and that inflate it, right? But it isn't well distributed. So it doesn't really mean anything for the country as a whole. It just means a lot for certain companies.
Yeah. And it's if you look at the, compared to other countries at a similar rate of development, a great deal of China's success in terms of, the popular consent that's arisen has been through the way that these things have had tangible effects upon the population at large, massive housing projects and infrastructure and things like that. Exactly. But as Xi is aware, and as he also draws attention to, and maybe we could say he's not aware enough, but there are also still big defects and blind spots within the system. And I mentioned a few, right? You look at the status with respect to social services of immigrant workers and certain people, especially in the countryside, and certain people in non-urban areas. The lack of a truly national Medicare system, right, is a big deal. A lack of proper regulation throughout different sectors, right? Like if you look at the way tech firms operate, for example, like there's really, really aggressive like data acquisition and stuff like that, right? That's poorly regulated, right? So you have all different kinds of issues, but the point is that more so than in certain places, which I think are of equivalent wealth, people in general feel that they've been beneficiaries of that, right? Yeah. So that's really crucial to understanding why they're so supported, but it doesn't mean that there aren't still major problems, because there are, right? Okay. At the same time, he says, I'm convinced the economy will keep going, but we're soberly aware of potential problems and challenges from falling demand, production overcapacity, local debts, and shadow banking. Falling demand is very interesting there, right? Because I said, look, like what you ask yourself, like, why are they trying to expand in Africa as well, right? Part of it's to deal with
they want to create more markets.
And when he says falling demand and when he says production overcapacity, he's saying the same thing, right? It has to do with the relationship between supply and demand. Local debts, right? And keep in mind, there's a certain, which Varoufakis alluded to, there's a certain fissure between the federal and local governments because of the more democratic character of the local governments. And shadow banking. What do you mean exactly by shadow banking? I'm going to feel really dumb now. That means anyone look? What is shadow banking exactly?
I don't know either.
Yeah.
Shadow banking. Shadow banking. Oh, non-bank financial intermediaries that provide services similar to traditional.
So just illegal loans and so on.
This is very interesting to put in the context of the Jack Ma thing, right? As well, right? Because Jack Ma, of course, was involved in. He was getting involved in the banking sector, but they've got all kinds of programs that in China, like private companies have started up these programs. They're not exactly like, it's not exactly banking, but like they're like, applications that can give you loans, right? Or that serve as intermediaries in rent payments and stuff like that. And it's really, really spread. And one of the initiatives, I think, of Xi in the past few years is to try to crack down. Some of these things have just become fixtures of Chinese life, but to try to regulate or eliminate a lot of these. I think as it stands, 86% of the banking sector proper is in public hands. But again, like he's saying, in terms of, especially with the development of digital services and stuff like that, because you have a certain tension, because the thing is in China, the digital sector is very private, right? So that's the thing. So, when you get that convergence between digital and banking, right? It creates opportunities. And this is what you see with Alibaba, right? For certain companies to move into doing banking or shadow banking, as you'd say, right? And that can be difficult, right? Because it doesn't necessarily, in China, there's been some problems. Like I know at one point there was an application that was being used for rent payments and the company went bankrupt and they didn't pay the people's rents. And there were like huge like fights between people hitting landlords with like baseball bats and people like smashing walls, just like really insane stuff. So, it creates difficulties, right? Obviously, like the Chinese public banking system isn't going to go to business, right? And just not be able to make its payments, right? You can't really, it's not going to happen. So, okay. So local debts and shadow banking, and we're paying close attention to possible impacts from external forces. In this connection, we are taking prudent and proper measures to forestall any potential problems. And I think when he's talking about external forces, he's probably thinking of like trade relations and stuff like that, right? And it almost is a certain anticipation of what's been happening in these last few years, right? I said so the West never pulled the rug out from under China because China was so essential to lowering the cost of the means of subsistence for their workers. And they still can't do that. You see this rhetoric against China, but they still won't do that. Yeah. That's the thing. What they're actually concerned about, it's very interesting, is they're concerned about blocking China from getting into high-tech sectors. Right? That's what they're concerned about. Because that's where the real American advantage is. Right? It's in more high innovation sectors. And in like branded products and stuff like that. Extraction of rent.
Yeah. And honestly, I would say was.
What? Was,
yeah.
Was? What are you saying? Was? Or
was? Was.
Was in the past. Okay. Yeah. They still have a big advantage in that way, though. China's getting better and better, but no one can come close to the States in terms of just the sort of high tech branded branded. But I mean in general, as in China, as also certain other parts of China's been the major driver of third world growth, but in other parts of the world too, we see that there's more and more competition in that respect. So again, I just want to stress that I think it's very telling that the focus is on these companies like Huawei, right? And it's not on, it's not on the shoes that are sold at Walmart or whatever, right? Because that's good. That's what China's supposed to do, right? Just stick with that. Don't go to Africa. Don't make fancy smartphones. Just stick to making, shoes to help us keep people poor. That's the basic idea.
It says here in 2012, China accounted for more than 50% of Asia's economic growth. Wow. By the end of the same year, China had approved more than 760,000 foreign commercial investments and attracted around US $1.3 trillion in foreign direct investment. China has signed 12 free trade agreements with 20 countries and regions, with 6 more under negotiation. Most of China's free trade partners are APEC members. In the coming 5 years, China will import over $10 trillion dollars worth of goods, invest over 500 billion overseas, and send over 400 million tourists abroad. China's growing domestic demand, particularly consumption and investment demand, will offer foreign investors more opportunities for cooperation.
Yeah, it's very interesting on page. It's very interesting on page 384 as well. He says in the future we're going to make the RMB exchange rate, renminbi exchange rate, more flexible, which is interesting because I don't know if you know, but this has been a point of contention for many years between the West and China because China has pegged its currency.
Yeah.
So let me check what the. Let me see if they ever did, because I think it was 15 was the long-term peg rate, and it just stayed at that like forever. Okay, right now I see 6. Okay, let me see what it was. I just want to look over a long-term graph. Let's see.
July 21, 2005, the peg was finally lifted, which saw an immediate one-time RMB revaluation to 8 RMB 0.11 per USD.
Well, it hasn't really changed that much over since 2013. It's 615 to 649, so it's nowhere close to growth.
It was reinstituted unofficially, and what else? So they just released a statement saying they were trying to, the same thing as she's saying right now. This is all before the speech she gave.
Yeah.
And yeah, by 2015, a reporter for MarketWatch reported that China had repegged the RMB.
Yeah, no, and it's been the same. And by the way, 1 won is 0.16 US dollar. So that's what I was saying. It's been like 0.15 forever. Right? Oh, it's 0.16 though. So his talk about I just find it interesting because this essay goes back like many years. But actually what he's talking about here, I think about, unless I'm misunderstanding it, what he's talking about here about more flexible exchange rates, I think hasn't fully materialized.
Yeah, it hasn't. Seems just exchanges very directly. Apparently 88% of the trade over the past year, I mean 2019, was was the US dollar.
Yeah.
And then the euro, and then the yen.
Yeah. Let's see. So he talks here about the implementation of the FTA strategy. Someone want to double check that? What is the FTA strategy? Let's see what that is. FTA strategy. Free trade agreement strategy. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Just generic.
Yeah. I think FTA. Very good. Some quotes. I'm just skipping through. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now you're at the one about 50 more than 50% of the economic growth.
Yeah.
760,000 foreign commercial investments. Wow. US 1.3 trillion in foreign direct investment. By the end of the same year. So that says 1.3 trillion in foreign direct investment that year. 12 free trade agreements with 20 countries and regions, with 6 more under negotiation. And I don't know if you know, they signed one with New Zealand very recently, which, as far as trade agreement goes, was good. It was with Jacinda Ardern and the government there. It was very open, but also there were good labor and environmental protections compared to
January 26th. Okay.
Yeah. Of course I don't know. Like, I think it's funny, like in the group, like there was some guy once and he's like, yeah, because Marxists support trade. And I'm like, what are you like? Doesn't make sense. Like, what you think? What, like in the, I don't even understand. Like, is trade capitalism? Is that the same thing? Isn't that like always?
He's just referencing Marx's argument for, I assume, the comment on free trade, which is like a specific position of the International Workingmen's Association, not a general principle or something like that.
Well, the thing is, like, free trade doesn't mean anything specifically, right? Usually it just means extensive trade deregulation.
Yeah, it just meant, do we have a tariff? Like, in the context of the essay, it's like, should the Working Men's Association support some tariffs or not? And Marx said we should not be for that. We should encourage free trade because something accelerate the contradictions, or language that's very similar to that.
Interesting. I haven't looked at this.
I know, like, it's funny because, like, that one gets picked up. I don't think it's in the accelerationist reader, but there are a couple of. It's funny what little bits of Marx find themselves in, like, that accelerationist space.
Yeah, well, the classic one is the fragment of machines, right?
Yeah,
always gets tried out for that. Yeah, I mean, like, my point just about trade was, like, you know, free trade doesn't have any prefix definition, right? You know, I think the issue that we've seen with trade agreements that have been signed between countries is that, you know, there is not labor protections and there's not environmental protections, right? And they've also went very, very far in the direction of treating, you know, like in Canada, for example, we have with NAFTA, you know, U.S. corporations are capable of actually litigating the Canadian government, right? You know, like, if they so the rights they afford to corporations legally as well, or can be over the top. All I meant is that, like, free trade is a bit of a floating signifier. You know, we know generally what it means, but I'm saying it's subject to reconfiguration at any given point in terms of how it operates. So I just meant that I'm pro trade, and I'm not even necessarily against free trade. It would just depend on what that means. I think in practice, tons of free trade agreements have been shit, right? I'll willingly say that, but we should be careful about speaking too generally. That's all I mean. China will import over US 10 trillion worth of goods in the coming 5 years. That's quite a bit of importing too. And send over 400 million tourists abroad. And that's a lot of tourism.
Yeah.
And that's crazy too. I remember I used to work at I got really fascinated because I used to work at a hostel in Ottawa. And we had books, like records of how many tourists came from each region. And I had to spend night shifts, and I started to get obsessed with reading through these books. And, like, you just find, like, you know, over a 10-year period, like, the number of tourists we'd have from Brazil go up like 4 times, 5 times, right? In like 10 years, you know, like, and it just speaks to not necessarily general prosperity in these countries, but it speaks to the fact that there's, like, a socially mobile class that's much larger than what you have had in the past, right? Because, you know, it's like Brazil. Like, I think, like, if you go back far enough, you have, like, very, very isolated enclaves and, like, bourgeois, you know, like, I think, like, at least in some equivocal form, like, slave ownership was legal until the fucking early 60s or something.
Yeah.
Like, but you were saying though, Ernesto?
Yeah.
But it's like, I think that, you know, what you're seeing now is, like, again, I don't want to suggest that it extends to all of the society, because I don't think that's at all true. I mean, go to the Amazon or something, right? But what you're seeing more and more is that there is a large socially mobile class, right? You know, and you see it here in Paris, right? There's a lot of Latin Americans here too, right? You know, and it's like, you got to have a lot of money, you know, in Latin America to come to Paris, you know, usually, right? So it's, so let's see here. The end of World War II was followed by an economic boom of more than 25 years in 13 economies around the world. One common feature of the economies was their opening up policy. We should follow the trend of the times, uphold a multilateral trading system that is free, open and non-discriminatory, and oppose all forms of protectionism. Which is a bit ironic, because China actually has a lot of protectionism, so it's like, okay.
Yeah, protectionism, like, for you, not for me.
That's China's favorite. Approach, right? Like, there's all kinds of things that Chinese people buy abroad, you know, that you just can't, like, you can't buy in China, right? Like, look at it, was it in Texas when they had the thing that was it a Chinese company that was involved in that? One of the power outages, or what the fuck was it? Was there power outages in Texas?
Yeah, there were
like
power
the ice storm
outages in Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, was it like a Chinese company was involved in this somehow? I forget all the details, but anyway, the point is, like, I don't know if that's what actually happened. I forget. But the point is, like, you can't go in and buy, like, core services. Like, you just can't do that.
Well, Texas is highly deregulated.
Yeah.
And that's why this happened.
So they don't mind, they'll buy your shit. Like, they don't mind buying your shit, but they don't let you buy their shit, right? Like, that's like, you know, so can you imagine, like, a Texas company, like, running, like, some core part of China's power grid? Like, dear God, no. Like,
yeah.
Let's see here. So yeah, so like, and he does say this. You actually see the thing about, and it strengthens in some ways the reference to the Marshall Plan I was saying when he talks about the post-war growth. And I think it's one thing he says sometimes, like he talks about the Cold War, and he says like this isn't like a zero-sum game, right? So you do see like this sort of this recognition of like, you know, that's kind of a point of no return in terms of how much China was able to, you know, enrich itself through making exports for other economies. Right. Mm-hmm. But it also leaves in its wake a certain kind of social crisis. Right. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like it solved many problems. But again, it's based on a cheap labor strategy that saw real purchasing power, the working class, move up much slower than other classes. Right. So I think there is a lot of like bubbling labor disaffection in China. And this is part of the reason in terms of just the general stagnation of the working class in that way, in relation, I say, to other classes, because the whole society has gotten richer. This is part of the reason that you see left populism, you know, one of the reasons you see left populism so strong today in China. Right? So there's something of a social crisis, too, that comes out of that. Right? He talks about the Asian Infrastructure Bank to help fund the infrastructural development of ASEAN countries.
Yeah,
and other developing countries in the region.
Yeah, which was founded in 16th of January, open for business.
Yeah.
Was proposed in 2013, which we just saw, and the initiative was launched at a ceremony in Beijing in October 2014. It received the highest credit ratings from the 3 biggest rating agencies in the world, and is seen as a potential rival to the World Bank and the IMF. Nice.
Yeah. Though different sort of approach, I would say.
Oh yeah.
In terms of the geopolitical objectives. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what people were, you know, in terms of. I think if you look at what China's doing now, that was like. By the way, I looked through the rest of it. I don't think anything else to mention. But I think if you look at what China's doing now, that's kind of like what people were hoping would happen, you know, with the sort of unipolar American world, end of history, you know, and this kind of thing. They were like, oh, well, you know, America's gonna come, like, you know, like there's this idea, right? Like in you know, in countries in Central Europe, like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to be like France, we're going to be like Germany, right? They're going to come, they're going to help us so much, right? You know, and that never happened exactly.
No.
Or really at all, though there have been a few examples of countries that have prospered. You know, that's kind of the thing. Too often, and it's what we were getting at earlier, too often these things were just used as like fronts to suck resources out of countries, right? Without there being, you know, when you look at it in terms of, like, you have to look at it in terms of the way that, you know, money was often being given to these countries on the condition that they weaken their entire like public and regulatory capacity, right? Mm-hmm. You know, cut taxes, eliminate regulation. It's like those are the exact things that China was doing, right? That have permitted them to be so relatively successful, right? Mm-hmm. You know, in the context of their interaction with foreign companies, right? You know, I mean, if the United States, if you had like World Bank like conditions instead of, you know, sort of the very equivocal character of Dengism, right? If you had like World Bank style conditions that were imposed on China at that time, you know, strip out regulatory capacity, you know, privatize all your national companies and so on, right? You know, implode your political structure, all of this, there's no way in hell they would have ever got to that position, mm-hmm. right? So, you know, it's about, you know, it's like, you know, it's this thing, right? Like, you know, and I've said this a bit often the way it works, right? It's like, I'm going to give you something, but I'm going to take away as much or more, right? You know, yeah, we'll give you some money, right? When you're desperately in need of it, but we're going to, you know, explode your entire central decision-making capacity and your ability to manage or you know, mitigate against foreign exploitation. Mm-hmm. Right. You know, and those are the bad choices that countries end up faced with. I mean, you look at Greece in the context of the European Union, right? You know, and it's like, you know, like basically you have a situation where, you know, you have Germany going there and saying like, look, we'll give you some money to help you get out of this, but you have to privatize X and X and X, and like, you know, then a German company will swoop in and buy it. And it's like, so your actual state revenue capacity, right, is being weakened. Your debt's not fully paid off, right, with the money they've given you, right, and you're in a weaker position to fulfill it, in which context the debt can be used as a means of manipulation. And that, that's something we have to remember too. It's like debt is not, it's not like everyone wants the debt paid off, right?
No, in fact, something that happens here in Latin America very often is that, so, here in Latin America, just like in the United States, there's this whole thing where there's alternance, right? You get a center right, and then a less center right, and then back to the center right, and then right. Okay. And the same thing happens in Latin America all around. And usually, when you get the more conservative governments, what they do to avoid a leftist government from actually coming in and getting popular support is that they go to the IMF and they take out massive loans and they privatize their economy. And the result is that when the left-wing government comes in, they have their hands tied, right? Varoufakis complained about this which what happened to him when he became Ministry of Finance, right? Greece's hands were tied up. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't take any proper decisions, and austerity measures had to be implemented so they could have some kind of social aid. Otherwise, there was no possibility. Here in Mexico, we came upon the same conflict, and what our president did, instead of taking out loans, which usually helps, blanket corruption and so on, he attacked corruption, and he extorted the taxes from the companies that they just weren't paying them, because there's a culture of, just don't give a shit, don't pay your taxes, the government won't investigate, and so on. And, things changed a bit. And we actually picked up thousands of millions of dollars in taxes for COVID, right? Which is something a lot of Latin American countries preferred not to do. And instead, they just dip into their debts.
Yeah, well, what Varoufakis was trying to accomplish in Greece is he was trying to accomplish extensive debt restructuring, which was entirely sensible in the context of, because Greece's debts were not serviceable, and so it was entirely understandable. And I think anyone with a solid background in economics would get why you would need to do that. But he ran up hard against the logic of the European Union, in the sense that what again was clear was that the goal was not actually to have them pay the debt. Right, the goal is to use the debt as a means to force them into a state of political servitude, to have them privatize services, and so on. So, this was an issue. And actually, it's very funny about this, because at one point, he was talking about his interaction with China. And at one point, he called China and he said, look, we got this big debt. And China basically agreed to pay Greece's debt over the phone. They were like, he talked to the ambassador, and the ambassador was like, yeah, he's like, it all seems good. Just let me run it up. And the ambassador called him. He's like, yeah, it all looks good. China was sitting there literally going to pay fucking Greece's debt. Like, are you kidding me? Right? Like, they're just going to be like, okay, here's your money. And Berlin called Beijing and they said, no, you can't do it. They didn't even want the money. They could have just taken the money. Yeah. Right? They refused.
Like you said, it's political strategy.
Yeah. Because for them, what happens? I mean, they get their money, but they don't really need the money. Greece is small.
Yeah, they want to plunder Greece. That's what they want.
Yeah, and they'll make more money off that in the long run. But also, turn Greece into sort of a vassal within the European Union, and they certainly don't want to strengthen Beijing's hand in the Mediterranean. So there are different. Yeah, and actually, this is it, right? With Italy and Greece, it's very telling. When he talks about what happened at Piraeus, right? These sort of offers. I mean, this is how China got in a position where Italy and Greece were willing to sign on to Belt and Road, right? That's what you got to understand, because China has been very, very open in their dealings with these countries, generous even, you might say, in certain respects. But, let's not be naive here, but generous in certain respects. And, as a consequence of that, there's been a certain amount of positive will, right? I mean, it's not like the Greeks and the Italians love the Chinese, but there's a certain amount of goodwill that's been built up. But you see, it's because of the incapacity to address, infrastructural needs, developmental needs, in Greece, in particularly the southern part of Italy, right? I mean, think of like the potential for like port investment in the southern part of Italy. I mean, like it's like people need fucking jobs, and like the EU, what they have not done, right, is they have not. They have not went far enough in terms of, you can throw money at people, right? But they haven't went far enough in terms of actually, going in and building the infrastructure and bringing their people. Right?
Yeah, I mean, this might be an oversimplification, but they sure seem to be hedging their bets on tourism, right?
Well, and that's the thing, right? And tourism is not, as we see with COVID, right? It shouldn't be the backbone of a fundamental backbone of an economy, right? And it's susceptible to, it can be greatly affected by different geopolitical shifts. It's nice to have. Tourism's everyone's business. It's a great thing to have, no doubt. But you look at a place like Greece, that is the basis.
Yeah.
Right. And it's kind of ironic with tourism because it's like, even tourism. I mean, if the Greeks I forget the year of the referendum, but a few years ago they voted to leave the European Union, and then that was reneged on by the government. If you look even at that situation, right? Had Greece, readopted the drachma, their currency, they could have lowered it, and it would have really boosted their tourism market, right? Because actually, even using the euro, right? Yeah, okay. Well, there are certain benefits, like it's in the European zone and so on. But at the same time, using the euro also has a negative effect on tourism because, like, it artificially inflates prices, right? Because that's the currency of everyone, right? It's not just the currency of Greece, which is the poorest country in the Mediterranean, right? And really the poorest country outside of Central Europe in the whole European Association, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, so there are also, there are advantages, but there are also distinct drawbacks, right, associated with that. So I'm saying it's in this context, right, where there hasn't been, and it's very simple. It's like, if you want to have, a single currency, you have to have interregional economic equality, relative interregional economic equality, and that hasn't been created in Europe. And, it's the defects of that system and the way that system has been exploited that has created an opening for China to expand their influence in the Mediterranean in particular, right? And they're very interested in that, right? Because of the importance of shipping, right, in that area, right? I mean, you'll never, you always have a hope, right? As long as you're in the Mediterranean, you always have a hope because it's such a, and I'm thinking of like the west coast of Turkey, right? Some of these places, it's like, because like there's so much money there, right, in commerce and shipping, right? There's a lot of ways that can be tapped into, right? But you got to have the infrastructure, and you got to have the setup, right? So I'm not an expert in Mediterranean sea commerce, but okay. So I think we're good, right, for this one. We got through everything.
Yeah.
I don't know, Timothy sort of vanished, but
BRB. He said BRB bio. I guess he has to go to the bathroom. Yeah.
Bio. Okay. Let's wait for him, and then we'll adjourn. We'll do that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I know what text we're gonna do next time, but I'm just finishing up here, just 5 or 6 more pages, and then I'll publish it with the next event, so you guys can do that.
Sounds good.
Cool. And I know our audience is kind of diminished over time. I know, just because it's it's like Chinese Marxism #1 is a lot more accessible than Chinese Marxism number 17.
Yeah.
And that's also an issue when we do these long form events. But I do think it's important because it gives you I think it's important to focus on these subject areas, right? Kind of delve into them. This has taken a lot of time. Yeah, this whole thing. Yeah, like it's a lot of reading. It was like 2,000 pages to get through this. So for me, it's been quite a lot. Very, very informative. Sometimes trying to penetrate the political logic is difficult beyond whatever you're reading. It's a bit tricky because you can't always take it at face value, right?
Yeah, of course. I usually, try to compare it with the developments in my own country, right? Which have the same quality of, the public figures giving these bombastic speeches, right? And, heartfelt regards to the people and so on and so on. And they just shaft you, right?
Yeah, jeez. Okay, so we're gonna adjourn. We're gonna adjourn, Timothy. We're done for today.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Shorter one. But we'll be back for our last session. Back for our last session on May 30th. So thank you guys so much for coming out. And this has been a Capital Comrades, not to be confused with Zero Books Capital Comrades. We're just Capital Comrades. Broadcast. So I'll see you guys on May 30, and I will publish the readings in the Facebook of the forthcoming Facebook event as well. Okay. Thanks. Have a good night.
Bye.